Let's talk further then about this with the SA Institute of International Affairs Russia-Africa Program Head, Stephen Gruzd. Stephen, a very good evening to you. Grateful for your time. So much talk in the last 48 hours about how Putin's authority has cracked. Has it?
Thanks, Tembekile, and thanks for having me on. Look, I think it's too early to tell. We're still in the aftermath of this insurrection, which now Prigozhin has said was not a coup. It was not an attempted coup. I think it definitely weakens Putin and his grip on the state, and it may have an effect on the morale of the Russian troops, which are already facing a big fight in Ukraine. And, I think we're going to see this playing out slowly or maybe even quickly over the next few weeks and months as the details unfold and as Putin tries to retain his grip on power.
But was this really a surprise, the events of Saturday, when you consider that Yevgeny Prigozhin had, in recent months, in fact, consistently gone against Russian military leaders in public in these telegram videos, and ultimately, when that was not reprimanded, especially from the level of President Putin, it appeared he was becoming bolder with each critique?
Yes, and although, telegram videos are very different from sending thousands of troops up the M4 to Moscow from the south of the country. So I don't know whether this was expected. Certainly for me, it caught me by surprise. Yes, he had been critical, and I thought that Putin had been giving him a long leash and allowing him to say quite bold things in a country that doesn't really brook much opposition. And it has been said now that foreign intelligence services did see the buildup of troops from the Wagner group and were wondering what that would lead to. But I don't think anybody really expected it to manifest in the way that it did on Saturday.
So Putin did not rein Yevgeny Prigozhin in when he began to make the addresses on the Telegram site about his unhappiness with the way in which his Wagner mercenaries were being armed by the Russians, how he claimed that they had died as a result of inaction by the Russian state. In fact, he claimed in this latest one, in the early hours, overnight, in fact, on Saturday, that there had been an attack by Russian forces on Wagner positions. All of that then went on. There was the march towards the capital, Moscow. Some areas had already been occupied, if you will, by Wagner mercenaries. And then at the end of it, he is allowed to basically leave the country, go settle in Belarus. We're told there will be no charges against Prigozhin and no charges against the mercenaries involved in the mutiny. How significant is that when you consider the environment in Russia and how Putin does not take kindly to opposition?
So I think that's been interpreted as a weakness of Putin, in that in the morning he was on TV calling these mercenaries traitors, and that this was an attack against the very state of Russia. But by the afternoon, we heard Prigozhin saying he's turning around his troops, and then there was the talk that he will be in Belarus. We don't know if he's in Belarus. We don't know where this latest video was sent from. But yes, it does suggest that there's something wrong in Russia that is causing this level of dissatisfaction. He has been quite consistently critical of Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, the head of the army, and the way that this special military operation, as the Russians still call it, has been conducted, saying that his men have been put in harm's way, that they haven't had the right equipment, that they haven't had the right ammunition, and that they are going to the slaughter. So, it's very difficult to know exactly what's happening in the Kremlin, but Putin will want to put forward that this is still business as usual, and we'll see where Prigozhin ends up and what this means for the Wagner group.
And there's some reporting today by Russian media that, in fact, the investigation into Prigozhin's conduct is continuing, but when you consider the fact that he's even been allowed to leave the country in a deal we're hearing brokered by Belarus, I wonder if Putin has, quote-unquote, let him off the hook, because ultimately the Russians, in order to be successful in what they call their special military operation in Ukraine, realize that they need the Wagner forces, they need Wagner boots on the ground.
Absolutely, and I think Wagner has been very effective in its operations in Ukraine, much more effective than the Russian army. And indeed, this might be Putin painted into a corner, and as you say, the recognition that he still needs the Wagner Group and their skills and expertise and their manpower, and so he couldn't go the full way of arresting Prigozhin and reprimanding the Wagner Group and the forces that make it up, but that he has allowed them to, as it were, get off the hook and still try and retain them as a fighting force.
Former President Mbeki, speaking to our reporters here in Genisa today on the developments of this past weekend, said, in fact, what is likely to happen is that there'll be a dissolution of the Wagner mercenaries, that force that was involved in the mutiny on Saturday, but that the rest, as per what the Kremlin had suggested, in fact, would basically become absorbed into the Russian military itself. As far as solutions that are workable go, would that be the end of this incident?
Well, this incorporation of Wagner units into the Russian army is one of the things that triggered this insurrection in the first place. And I saw that in his latest statement, Prigozhin said that very few of his fighters have actually signed the agreement to be absorbed into the Russian army. So, with respect to President Mbeki, I don't know how easy it is going to be to distinguish who is where. And the sense from Prigozhin is that Wagner does not want to be incorporated into the Russian army. So I think there's still a way to go on this one.
Just lastly then, Wagner forces, these mercenaries are also basically propping up militaries in various parts of the African continent, among those countries the CAR, where there's a presence. If there's a massive fallout beyond what we've seen this weekend between Putin and Prigozhin, might there be implications for the presence of the mercenaries on the continent, and what might that be?
I think so. I mean, the kingpin that's been holding this all together has been Prigozhin, and what is his ability? What might be his ability to operate from Belarus? What is his possibility of travel? I think the forces are very dependent on their leader, and we'll have to see what the implications are, whether fighters will be leaving Africa and going back to Europe, whether there's a drawdown in these countries, or whether they are reinforced, or whether things stay the same. I think that's one of the big questions that's hanging over this very strange 48-hour period that we've just witnessed.
Stephen Gruzd, good to speak to you with the SA Institute of International Affairs Russia-Africa program.